The wind came in hard off the prairie, slicing through Elias Hart's coat like a blade and filling his mouth with dust. He stood on the wooden platform of Dry Hollow Station, hat pulled low, shoulders stiff, waiting for the woman who might as well have been a ghost. Behind him, the land stretched flat and endless, brown gold and brittle from weeks without rain. Ahead, the distant whistle of the inbound stagecoach cut through the silence like a warning. He was sweating, though the wind was sharp and biting, not from heat, from dread. He'd written that damn letter 3 months ago, when the loneliness had grown too thick to shake and the cabin too quiet to sleep in. It was supposed to be a simple solution, a practical one. He needed help on the ranch, a woman who could cook, clean, keep things running, someone sturdy, uncomplicated. Instead, he'd gotten a reply signed in neat, careful handwriting from a woman named Clara Bennett out of Boston. And now, any minute, she was going to step off that coach and see him. A man with dirt under his nails, ghosts in his eyes, and a cabin 30 miles from the nearest church pew. The wind howled, snapping the edge of his coat. The coach wheels hit the packed earth like thunder, and then it stopped. The driver jumped down, tossed Elias a nod. "Got something for you, Hart." Elias didn't move. The coach door swung open. A dry goods merchant stepped down first, then a woman with 2 screaming children and too many parcels, and then she appeared. She didn't look like she belonged to this place. Tall, composed, wearing a traveling cloak and a dark blue bonnet that only half hid auburn hair tied back too neatly for Texas. Her carpetbag was small but held like it weighed more than it should. Her eyes swept the platform and landed on him calm, assessing green. Elias removed his hat, throat dry. She walked toward him like she'd done it 100 times before, not a flicker of hesitation. Her voice was crisp, refined, yet clear as a creek bed. No tremble, no doubt. "Elias Hart." She stopped in front of him. "Clara Bennett, I believe we have an agreement." He couldn't speak for a moment, not because he didn't believe her, but because everything about her screamed wrong. Wrong for this place, wrong for him, too clean, too fine. His letter hadn't promised much. A cabin, a working ranch, a marriage of necessity, no flowers, no frills, no romance, just survival. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong, Mr. Hart?" He cleared his throat. You weren't what I expected." "Because I'm not worn down or plain enough to match your list." Her expression didn't shift. Her words didn't carry offense, just fact. He hesitated. "I didn't mean it like that." "You meant it exactly like that, and I understand. You expected someone with more grit, maybe less polish. But I assure you, Mr. Hart, I am who I said I was in my letter. I can work, I will work. I didn't come all this way to be sent back." A gust of wind whipped around them. Clara didn't flinch. Elias scratched the back of his neck. "You sure about this place? It's not what most would call hospitable." "I'm not here for hospitality." She lifted her chin. "I'm here for a new life, and I believe you have one available." He let out a breath, turned toward his wagon this way. The ride from the station to the ranch was long and quiet, the kind of silence that pressed up against the ribs. Elias stole glances at her as they bumped along the dirt road. She didn't complain. Not about the dust or the cold or the way the wagon jolted over ruts. She watched the land with unreadable eyes, the way a woman might look over the edge of a cliff and decide whether she could survive the fall. "You grew up in Bias?" asked finally. "Just outside, on a horse farm." Her voice had lost a bit of that clipped edge now. 3 generations, then my father died and the creditors came." "You worked the farm?" "Since I was 12. He nodded, didn't say more. The sun began to dip low, casting the land in burnt orange and violet. When the ranch finally came into view, Elias felt his stomach twist. The cabin was plain logs weathered from years of sun and storms. The barn stood tall beside it, solid but patched in places. Chickens scattered as the wagon rolled in. One of the horses whinnied from the corral. "Here it is," he said. And then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It looks honest. Most call it rough. Rough can be honest, too. She stepped down from the wagon before he could offer a hand and walked toward the porch with the sure footing of someone who knew work. He carried her bag inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and leather, clean but sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a small stove. He suddenly wished he'd swept the hearth again. "There's the bedroom," he said. "You can take it. I'll sleep in the storage room." Clara looked at him. That wasn't part of the arrangement. "Nom, but it feels right." She nodded once. "Thank you." They moved through the rest of the evening with polite distance. Supper was quiet. Bread, beans, and leftover stew. She ate without complaint. He caught her staring at the fire after they finished. Her face softened, shadows dancing across her features. "You think it'll work?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him. "That depends, Mr. Hart. Are you hoping for a partner or just help?" Elias didn't answer. Because he wasn't sure yet. Later that night, after she'd gone to the bedroom and the fire had burned low, Elias sat alone at the table, staring into the dark. He should feel relief. He wasn't alone anymore. The ranch had another set of hands. Meals would be warm again. But what he felt instead was something sharper. Uncertain. He had asked for a woman to share his work. Instead, fate had delivered someone who might just end up sharing his soul. "You weren't the woman I expected," Elias said softly. Clara didn't flinch. "That's good. Because I didn't come here to meet expectations." The morning broke quiet, pale gold light stretching through the slats of the cabin windows. Elias Hart was already outside, saddling the gelding before the frost had melted. He expected to do the morning chores like he always had alone. But when he walked back toward the barn with an armful of kindling, he saw her. Clara. Standing in the half-light, dressed in a plain calico work dress, sleeves rolled, hair braided down her back like she'd been born on this land. She was already mucking out the first stall, pitchfork in hand, moving with the kind of confidence that couldn't be faked. She looked up. "Good morning, Mr. Hart. Hope you don't mind. I found the shovel." He blinked. "You don't have to do that." "That wasn't the question. I asked if you mind." Elias shifted the wood in his arms. "No, I don't." She nodded and turned back to her work. By the time he set the kindling near the stove and came back, she'd cleared 2 more stalls. Her movements were efficient, not fast, not sloppy, purposeful. She worked with her weight in her heels, hands firm, not dainty. He'd seen young ranch hands do worse. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" "Horses don't care if you're tired or fancy. They care if you're stupid or slow." Elias gave a short laugh. She smiled faintly but kept working. After a while, they moved in a rhythm: feed, muck, brush, water. Few words passed between them, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that settled in when 2 people were focused on the same goal. Maybelle, his pregnant mare, watched Clara closely. When Clara stepped into her stall with a fresh flake of hay, the horse nickered low and stretched her head forward to sniff her coat. "She's taken to you," Elias murmured. "Animals know when you mean it." He liked the way she said things, like they were facts, not opinions, like she'd lived long enough to earn them. They were halfway through the second corral when a rider appeared on the ridge. Elias looked up and frowned. Clara asked, "Hank Morrison, neighbor, if 30 miles counts." Clara waited quietly as Hank rode in, reined his horse, and dismounted with the ease of a man who used to be strong, but now carried too much bitterness in his shoulders. "Heard you brought in a woman," Hank said without greeting. Elias didn't answer right away. Hank looked at Clara, didn't expect her to be so clean. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "That can be fixed." Hank barked a laugh. "Ain't often the bride starts in the barn." "Ain't often the groom owns one," she replied evenly. Hank's amusement faded. He tipped his hat and muttered something about checking fences. As he rode off, Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "You too?" Clara asked. Elias said, his wife left 2 winters ago, never quite forgave her or himself. Clara was quiet a moment. Maybe she left because she was tired of being alone while married. He looked at her. "Is that what you're afraid of here?" "No," she said. "I'm afraid of being here and still not belonging." They finished the morning in silence, but something had shifted. Inside, the cabin felt warmer than usual, though the stove hadn't been touched. Clara pulled her gloves off, ran her fingers through her hair, and began boiling water for dishes. "What's the plan for today?" she asked. "Haul water to the southern troughs, then check the fencing near the creek." "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." That wasn't the question either, Mr. Hart. They hitched the wagon and headed south. Clara took in everything: the land, the birds overhead, the way Elias scanned the horizon like it might turn on him. He caught her watching. "You're waiting for me to fall apart." "I'm watching to see what you do when you don't." She didn't smile at that, just looked forward and said, "Smart horses don't bolt at the first loud noise. They bolt when they think no one's holding the reins." That made him pause, because maybe, without meaning to, he'd let go of the reins on his own life long ago. They reached the creek. The fence had buckled in one spot where an old post had rotted through. Clara climbed down before he could offer a hand and started inspecting the wire. "There's no rust," she said, "but the tension's gone. We can splice it." He raised a brow. "You know fencing?" "I know how to keep horses where they're supposed to be." Elias handed her the tools and watched her work, side by side with him. It was the first time in years he hadn't resented a second pair of hands near his fence line. When they finished, they sat by the water for a minute, both dirty and tired but at ease. "You didn't come here for comfort," Elias said, breaking the quiet. Clara looked at him. "No, I came here for clarity, and maybe a little peace." "Think you'll find it here." She considered that. "If I don't, it won't be the land's fault." The light was starting to fade by the time they got back. The air had cooled, and Clara wrapped her shawl tighter. Elias noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly, not from cold but from exhaustion she refused to admit. He wanted to tell her to rest. He wanted to ask what she'd been through that made her try so hard not to be a burden. Instead, he said, "There's stew left." She smiled faintly. "Then we won't go hungry." They ate in the warmth of the stove, and as she set the dishes to soak, Elias found himself watching her again, the way she moved, the way she took space without asking for it. He realized then he wasn't afraid of her being too fragile. He was afraid of needing her. And needing anything again was something he hadn't let himself feel in years. That night the wind rose again. Dry Hollow shook under it, the windows rattling in their frames. Elias couldn't sleep, not because of the wind, but because of the silence in the next room and the smell of her soap lingering in the hall. He rose, paced once, stepped out onto the porch. Above, the stars wheeled overhead, vast and cold. Behind him he heard a floorboard creak. Clara stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl. "You don't sleep well either," she said. "I don't think it's the wind." He turned. She met his gaze steadily. Then a soft noise from the barn. A long, low nicker. Elias stiffened. Clara heard it too. She said. And without another word, they both started running. Maybelle nickered softly as Clara stroked her belly. "She's close," Clara whispered, "too close to wait." The barn door groaned as Elias shoved it open, the wind hurling itself against the frame. Clara was just behind him, breath ragged, skirts soaked from snow melt. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sweat, hay, and something sharper, blood. Mabel stood trembling in the corner stall, flanks hiving, foam streaking her dark coat. The mare let out a ragged whinny, her hind legs stamping. "She's in labor," Clara said, already climbing into the stall. "But something's wrong." Elias followed, grabbing the lantern from the hook and lighting it with shaking hands. The glow flickered across Maybelle's side. He saw it then, the tremor in her haunches, the tightness in her body. She wasn't just giving birth. She was struggling. "I need towels, clean rags, twine if you have it," Clara ordered, "and a knife." Elias didn't question. He moved fast, the way you move when the land is burning behind you and there's no time to ask why. He returned with the supplies. Clara was already kneeling beside the mare, sleeves rolled, hands slicked to the wrist. "The foal's turned wrong," she muttered, "back legs first. If she pushes now, it could kill them both." Elias crouched beside her. "What do we do?" She looked at him, and for the first time he saw fear in her eyes, not panic, fear sharpened into resolve. "We go in and turn it together." The minutes that followed blurred into blood, breath, and raw willpower. Clara coached him, arms buried, guiding the foal inch by inch. Elias held Maybelle's head, whispering to her, steadying her body against each wave of pain. The storm outside screamed through the barn walls. Inside, all that mattered was the life hanging between two worlds. Clara gritted her teeth, sweat beading on her brow. "Now, tell her to push." "Come on, girl," Elias murmured. "You've got this, just one more." With a final surge, Maybelle shrieked and collapsed sideways as the foal spilled out in a wet heap onto the hay. Silence. Clara cleared the nose, rubbed the chest. The foal didn't move. "Come on," she said, rubbing harder. "Come on, little one." Elias held his breath. A twitch, a squeal. The foal took its first breath, legs kicking weakly. Clara sat back hard, covered in muck and shaking. Elias stared, stunned. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected softly. Maybelle nuzzled the foal with exhausted affection. Clara leaned back against the stall, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with the back of her hand. Her eyes glistened. Elias asked. She gave a shaky laugh. "I've pulled calves before, but not with the wind howling like the devil was outside." He let himself laugh, too. It felt strange, like something stretching in his chest he hadn't used in years. He sat beside her, close but not touching. "What now?" he asked. "We watch her, make sure she nurses. Make sure the little one stands." She paused, then looked down at the foal. "She's a fighter. You gonna name her?" Clara hesitated. Elias glanced over. Seemed fitting. He watched her for a moment, the way her hand rested gently on the newborn's back, her eyes not leaving the small rise and fall of its chest. "You always this calm during storms?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but I've learned how to hold still when everything else shakes." They stayed in the barn until dawn. Maybelle stood, the foal wobbling beside her. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the world outside hushed and white. When they finally returned to the cabin, Elias poured water to boil while Clara stripped out of her wet clothes and wrapped herself in a spare blanket. She sank into the chair near the stove, hands trembling now that the urgency had passed. He handed her a cup. "You saved them both. It wasn't just me." He crouched in front of her. "It was mostly you." Her voice softened. "I needed to be needed, that's all." Elias opened his mouth, then closed it, because he knew that feeling, knew it too well. He sat beside her in the quiet. The fire popped. She turned to him, searching his face. "You thought I was just a city girl." He didn't deny it. "You thought I'd break," she added. "I thought you'd leave." She looked away. "I thought I might too." Silence again. "But I didn't." Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. She looked back at him. "You weren't the wrong groom, Elias. Maybe I was just the wrong assumptions." Outside, the wind had died. Inside, something else had begun. They didn't touch, but they didn't need to, not yet. The fire between them had caught in a different way. She sat in the hay, soaked in blood and straw, laughing through tears. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, "and maybe this place is too." The days after the foaling passed in a kind of quiet haze. The weather broke. Sunlight bled through the clouds, and the snow melted in streaks down the hills, leaving behind slick mud and the slow return of life to Dry Hollow. Maybelle recovered well, and the filly, now officially named Hope, took to her legs faster than expected. She stumbled around the stall like a drunk child, legs too long, head too big but full of life. Clara doted on her with a gentleness Elias hadn't expected to see from a woman who just pulled a horse from death with her bare hands. But more than that, something between Elias and Clara had shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but there was a new warmth in the air that hadn't been there before. Something unspoken had passed between them the night Hope was born, a kind of shared understanding that went deeper than words. Still, Elias kept his distance. He wasn't sure if it was fear or caution or habit, but he caught himself watching Clara more than he should. Like now, as she stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair tied in a messy knot. She wasn't humming, but her body moved like someone who knew the rhythm of peace, even if she hadn't had it long. He cleared his throat. "How's the hand?" "Bruised, sore. But it'll heal." "Good." She turned back to the pot. "I meant what I said the other night, about not leaving." He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Even if it gets harder." "It will get harder. That's not a reason to go." He wanted to ask what would be, but something told him he didn't want to hear that answer yet. That afternoon they took a walk beyond the barn, up the ridge where the old orchard used to be. Clara wore his second-best coat, too big on her but warm. Elias carried a shovel in case they found the trail still iced. They walked in companionable silence. Clara stopped near a gnarled tree stump. "This used to be apple. Years ago, before the blight, my mother planted them, tried to bring a little sweetness to this place." Clara bent to touch the bark, cracked and gray. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "You would have." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "You said once your brother died from fever." Elias nodded slowly. "Thomas, he was 20, braver than me, always chasing wild mustangs or trying to rope 2 steers at once. He caught the fever 3 winters ago. I rode 30 miles through snow to fetch the doctor. Didn't matter." Clara's voice was gentle. "You blame yourself." He didn't answer at first, just stared out at the open land. "I was supposed to keep him safe. It was always justice after Pa died. Then Ma went, and it was me and him." Clara said nothing, just stood beside him. He exhaled. After he passed, the place went quiet, cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. "That's when I sent that letter." "You didn't expect me." "No." She gave him a sideways look. "Are you glad it was me?" He didn't answer right away, and "I don't think this place would have woken up without you." Clara turned her gaze back to the stump. "Then maybe we should plant something new." "Here." She nodded. "This land wants life, you can feel it. It just needs someone to believe in it again." That evening, Clara brought out a small box from her carpet bag. She opened it on the table. Inside were a few letters, a pressed flower, and a folded photograph. She handed it to Elias. "This was my father." The man in the photo had kind eyes and a strong jaw, a working man. "He taught me how to saddle a horse, shoot straight, and never beg. When he died, my aunt took me in. Boston was a cage. I nearly forgot how to breathe." "What made you leave?" "She arranged a marriage, a man with money and a bad temper. Said it was my duty. I said no. She didn't take kindly." "No," Clara said. "I walked. Packed one bag, took the early train, and mailed my reply to your letter from the station. I wasn't running. I was choosing." Elias studied her. "And this life, is it what you thought?" She smiled, small and tired. "It's real. That's better than I hoped." Later, while Elias chopped wood, Miss Hattie arrived on her buggy with 2 sacks of flour and a basket of questions. "So," she said, peering over her spectacles, "how's the new arrangement?" "Working." "Working," he says. She looked past him to the window, where Clara was wiping down the table inside. She seems like the kind of woman who plants seeds wherever she goes. You better be sure you're not just watching her do it all. What are you getting at, Hattie? I'm getting at the fact that she didn't come here to disappear. If she wanted that, she could have married the banker's son and lived in a silk prison. You think she picked you so she could fade into the wallpaper? Elias said nothing. Hattie softened. Don't be afraid to choose her back. That's all I'm saying. That night, Elias stepped out onto the porch. Clara followed a minute later, wrapping herself in her shawl. The stars were bright, unblinking. The filly neighed from the barn. You said you weren't running, he said finally. You were choosing. I still am. He turned toward her, voice low, so choose me. Ask me to. His hands curled around the edge of the railing. I will. But not because it's convenient. Not because we need each other. I want to ask when I know you want to stay even if you don't have to. She nodded slow. Then I'll not forever. They stood together in the silence, stars above, the earth breathing quietly beneath their feet. You're not a burden, Elias said. You're a beginning. But in Clara's eyes something flickered, doubt, or maybe fear. The storm came fast and hard. Dark clouds rolled over Dry Hollow like a threat, snow swirling sideways by mid-afternoon. Elias had seen storms like this before, the kind that buried wagons and kept folks housebound for days. He'd meant to ride into town to check the fencing contracts left with Hattie, but the sky changed faster than expected. By sundown they were snowed in. Clara stood at the window, watching the white curtain outside thicken, arms wrapped around herself. Her face didn't show fear exactly, but something close to alertness, like a woman who didn't trust quiet things to stay quiet. You ever get snow like this in Boston? Elias asked from the hearth. Sure, but not with this kind of silence. City snow is noisy, slush and shovels and horses slipping. She trailed off. He waited. This kind of snow feels like it covers more than roads. Elias poked the fire. The wind howled outside, pushing against the walls of the cabin like it wanted in. Clara turned. How long does it usually last? 2, maybe 3 days. Depends how deep it settles. She nodded, lips pressed tight. Well then, looks like we'll learn how to pass time. The first night passed in a strange rhythm. They played 2 games of checkers in near silence. Elias let her win the first. She didn't let him do it again. They ate stew from the same bowl and drank coffee that tasted like it had absorbed the storm. At one point the wind slammed a shutter so hard Clara jumped. Elias chuckled. You can survive birthing a breech foal in a thunderstorm, but not a shutter. Surprise me is all. He leaned back in his chair. You don't scare easy. She didn't reply right away. Then fear doesn't always show up as screaming. Sometimes it just sits inside you like a coin at the bottom of a deep well. Elias looked at her carefully. That what it feels like now? By the second day, the snow outside had formed smooth drifts against the barn, reaching halfway up the door. Elias considered trying to dig out a path, but Clara stopped him. There's enough wood, enough food. Maybelle's fed and dry. Hope too. You don't need to prove anything to the snow. He raised an eyebrow. You think that's what I'm doing? I think you're not good at sitting still with people who see you. That stung, but it was fair. Instead of fighting it, Elias sat. He pulled out an old book of poems his mother had once read aloud by lamplight. Clara took it from his hand and read a few lines out loud. Her voice was steady and clear, but something inside it trembled. I forgot how words could feel like hands, she said quietly, gentle but firm. Who made you forget that? She looked at him, expression unreadable. Boston did, the silence between people. The way you could be in a room and still not matter. He wanted to say she mattered here. That she took up space in his mind even when she wasn't speaking. But he didn't. He just got up and made more coffee. That night the tension shifted. Elias reached across the table to take a plate from her hands. Their fingers touched. A moment passed. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Later, she stood near the fire, rubbing lotion into her palms. Elias watched her, every movement soft, intentional. There was a kind of aching honesty in how she inhabited the space, like she wasn't trying to perform or pretend. "You ever think about what it means?" she asked, not looking at him. "What?" "Being wanted." He nodded slowly. "I thought I had it once, when Ma was alive, when Thomas was here. After they were gone, I figured it wasn't meant for me." She turned then and now. "Now I don't know what to do with it when it's standing in front of me." Their eyes held for a long time. Then Clara looked away. "I came here because I wanted a new life. Not a rescue, not ownership." Elias stepped closer, careful. "You're not a thing to be owned. You never were." "You say that now, but I need to know it'll stay true when I make mistakes, when I speak out." Spring crept into Dry Hollow like a whisper rather than a shout. The snow melted slow and stubborn, turning the world to mud before the first green shoots dared to rise. Elias watched it all from the edge of his porch, boots on the rail, a quiet heaviness in his chest. Clara was in the garden. She had cleared the frostbitten weeds and was kneeling in damp soil, sleeves rolled, cheeks flushed, planting early carrots beside the old herb row. She worked like the land owed her something, or maybe like she owed it a promise. They hadn't talked much since the letter, or more precisely since she burned the letter. Elias understood why she did it, but understanding didn't mean the silence that followed wasn't thick. He stepped off the porch, crunching the path she'd made through the frost. "You think it's warm enough to take?" Clara didn't look up. "Ground says yes, sky might disagree." "That a Boston farmer's instinct talking?" "That," she said, brushing dirt from her fingers and a little hope. They stood there, the word hanging between them. Not just the foal's name now, but something bigger. Elias cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to take a ride out east. Fence line near the creek's come loose again. Might run into Hank. He said he had a harness I could buy." Clara stood, dusting off her skirt. "Want company?" He hesitated. She noticed or not. "No, I do," he said quickly. "I just wasn't sure if you wanted to come. I go where I'm useful." "You're more than useful, Clara." The words came out soft, like they surprised even him. She looked at him then fully. "I need to be more than useful. I need to be real to someone. Not convenient, not strong when it suits." Elias stepped closer. "You are. Real. You take up space in here." He tapped his chest. "More than you know." She nodded once. "Then let's ride." They saddled the horses mid-morning. Hope trailed along outside the barn, now all long legs and restless energy. Clara rode Maybelle slowly, easing her through the mud. Elias led the way, the rifle slung low over his saddle. The ride was quiet at first, both of them watching the trail, the trees, the sky. Then Clara asked, "Did you love someone before?" Elias didn't answer right away. The trail dipped and rose. He adjusted his reins. "A girl from the church down in Carter," he said finally. "We were 16. Thought we'd marry. Then her father sold the cattle line and moved her east. I sent 2 letters. She sent." "That was the last?" "No, just the first time I learned some things don't stay." Clara nodded, eyes forward. "You want marriage to feel safe." "I want it to feel chosen, not endured." They stopped by the creek, dismounted, checked the fencing. Clara held the wire steady while Elias hammered in a new post. Her hands were red and scraped, but she didn't flinch. "This land," she said, "asks so much. It gives too if you stick around long enough." She looked at him sideways. "That's what you're hoping for?" He nodded. "With the right person." Their eyes met again. Something almost passed between them, but then a rider appeared on the hill, fast and reckless. Hank. He rode up hard, face tight, sweat on his collar. "You heard?" he asked, out of breath. Elias stood straighter. "Heard what?" "Stage got robbed near Split Ridge. 2 riders. One of 'em was a woman. They shot the driver. took the lockbox. Clara stepped forward. Was anyone killed? No, but the driver's bad off. Sheriff's riding out tomorrow. Folks in town are spooked. They're saying the robbers were headed this way. Elias tensed. Think they'd come this far? Not sure, but if they need shelter. He left the rest unsaid. Clara looked between them. We need to check the south pasture gate. It doesn't lock. Elias nodded. Tonight, I'll take the rifle. Hank looked to Clara. You ever fire a gun? Only when I mean it, she said, cool. Hank gave her a crooked grin. I believe that. That night, Elias loaded the rifle, checked the doors twice, and kept his coat by the fire. Clara stood beside the table, holding a pistol he didn't know she had. Where'd that come from? He asked. Boston. I carried it in my satchel just in case. He studied her. You really were ready to walk through fire, weren't you? They stood in the quiet. If they come, he said, you stay back. Eaton. Elias didn't argue, because he knew better. The knock came after midnight. Sharp. Measured, not the pounding of desperation, but the knock of someone who wanted in and didn't care if they were welcome. Elias rose from the chair, rifle in hand. Clara was already beside him, pistol at her side. He stepped to the door. Who is it? Cool, measured. My name's Rose. My brother and I were headed east. Storm caught us. Our horse ran off. We need warmth, just for the night. Elias looked to Clara. Clara's voice was low. She said, brother, not husband. Could be the ones, Elias muttered. Another knock. Please, the woman called. We're freezing out here. Elias gripped the handle. We don't want trouble, the woman added. He opened the door an inch. Two figures, woman in a dark coat, face shadowed, a man behind her, gaunt hand near his belt. Clara stepped into view. You armed? No. But, slowly. They entered. Clara didn't lower her pistol. The woman's eyes flicked over the cabin. Her brother looked twitchy. Elias poured water into the pot. You said your horse ran off. Spooked by coyote. Funny, ain't heard coyotes all week. The brother shifted. We're just passing through. Clara stepped forward. No, you're not. You came here because you thought we'd be scared. You figured you'd find a man and a housewife and take what you wanted. The man reached for something under his coat. Elias raised the rifle. Clara cocked her pistol. Don't, she said. Froze. The woman sighed. We ain't shot nobody yet. Don't plan to. But you would. Clara said you already did, back at the stage. Elias nodded toward the door. Leave your weapons on the table. You'll ride out at first light. And if you're smart, you'll keep riding past every ranch for 100 miles. The woman nodded. You two ain't what you seem. Clara smiled. Cold, neither are you. The sun rose pink and blood tinged. The strangers left, weapons confiscated, packs empty. Clara leaned against the porch rail. Elias poured coffee. You could have killed him, he said. So could you. He nodded. She looked up at him, serious. This is what marriage looks like, Elias. Not just meals and fences. It's standing side by side when the door gets kicked in. He looked back at her. All of it. With you. Clara set the pistol down slowly. You said you wanted a partner. Then you better mean it when the bullets start flying. Spring unfurled slowly across Dry Hollow like a promise kept. The air turned softer and the land breathed deeper. Wildflowers pushed their way through cracked earth. Bees returned to the orchard trees and the foal Hope raced through the pasture like she owned it. But peace didn't come easy. The day after the strangers left, Clara hadn't slept. She'd stayed by the window all night, pistol in her lap, eyes dark and focused. Even after Elias double, checked the locks, walked the perimeter twice, and bolted the barn, she didn't rest. The next morning, her silence was louder than any wind. Elias fixed coffee and slid her a cup across the table. You think they'll come back? Clara shook her head. They won't. But the danger's not gone. Then what is it? She stared at the flame in the stove. It's what that night proved, that no matter how far I run, trouble follows. I brought it with me. No, he said, they found us. But we stood together. That matters. She didn't look convinced. Later that week, Miss Hattie arrived in her wagon with supplies, gossip, and a strong opinion or two. I heard about your guests, she said, passing Elias a sack of flour. Clara stepped onto the porch. They left before sunrise. Not before leaving a mark, Hattie said. Whole town's buzzing. Sheriff says they matched the description of that brother-sister pair who robbed the stage near Laramie last fall. Elias whistled. Hattie glanced between the two of them. Well, you scared Em off. I suppose now folks will say you're not just ranchers. You're legends. Clara didn't laugh. We're just people who kept the door shut. A good marriage does that, Hattie said gently. Stands between the cold and the fire. She leaned closer, eyes twinkling. Speaking of which, when are you two going to stop pretending this ain't more than a mail-order arrangement? Clara flushed, but Elias answered soon. When the time feels like ours. Hattie nodded. Just don't wait so long you forget how to want it. That evening, Clara climbed up to the ridge above the pasture alone. Elias watched her from the barn, a strange heaviness pulling at him. When she didn't come down after an hour, he followed. She stood beneath the dying apple trees, arms folded, eyes on the horizon. He stepped beside her. You thinking of leaving? She turned slowly. No, but I'm thinking about how close I came to it, and how I've never stayed anywhere long enough to regret leaving. She glanced down. There was a man back in Boston. He wasn't violent, not at first. Just loud, sharp with words, controlling in subtle ways. Then he hit my cousin. Said it was a mistake. Said I was lucky it wasn't me. That's when I knew I had to go. Elias felt something coil in his chest. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to be that woman again. The one who needed saving. He stepped closer. You're not. You're the one who did the saving. You made this place breathe again. So why do I still feel like I'm standing on one foot, ready to run? Because no one ever asked you to stay, not really, not for who you are. He paused, then reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small velvet pouch. This was my mother's. He opened it. Inside was a silver ring, simple, worn, but polished with care. Clara. I wasn't planning on asking like this, Elias admitted. Not up here. Not with the dirt and wind and no dinner table. But you said you needed to be asked, so I am. He held it out. Will you stay? Not because the cabin's warm or the porch is wide, but because I want to build a life where you never have to wonder if you belong. Clara stared at him, tears welled in her eyes, unexpected and fast. I came here thinking I was choosing freedom, she said. But maybe I was choosing the wrong kind, the kind that kept me from getting close, from being known. She reached out, took the ring. Yes, she whispered, but not because I need protection, because I want partnership. He smiled. Then that's what you'll have. They stood there, quiet, wind wrapping around them like a witness. The wedding was 2 days later, just them under the old orchard, with Miss Hattie reading from a worn family Bible and Hank awkwardly holding the rings. No fancy dress, no guests, just Clara in a blue skirt, hair braided down her back, and Elias in his best clean shirt. When Hattie said the words, "You may kiss the bride," Elias did, gently, with both hands on Clara's face, like she was something he'd finally dared to believe was real. The town would later talk about it like it was legend. But for them it was just the beginning. That night, back at the cabin, they sat on the porch together. No rush, no loud declarations, just hands touching. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. You really think people can start over? Elias looked out across the pasture. I don't think I know. We already did. Clara slipped the ring onto her finger, eyes still wet. Then let this be the last time I ever wonder if I'm home. The summer came in slow, golden waves. Dry hollow shimmered under the sun, fields bursting with wildflowers, bees thick in the air. The land, once brittle and cautious, had softened with time, and so had the people on it. Clara stood at the garden fence, her hands covered in soil, the brim of her straw hat pulled low. Rows of vegetables reached for the sky, stubborn and alive much like her. The corn had taken well, and the beans were climbing fast. She'd planted more than food here. She'd planted something inside herself, too, something rooted and growing. Elias came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. His beard brushed her neck. "You got dirt on your nose again." "Good," she said, leaning into him. "It means I'm doing it right." "That it does." They stood like that a while, no rush, no storm on the horizon. Hope galloped past the fence, kicking up dust, full grown now, lean and fast. "She never tires, does she?" Elias said. She turned in his arms. "You were quiet at breakfast. What's got you brooding today?" He hesitated, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Letter came this morning from Boston." Clara's face didn't change. "Your aunt passed, left her estate to a cousin. No mention of you." Clara blinked once, then nodded. "That tracks." Elias waited for more, for grief or maybe relief, but Clara just looked out over the land. "She told me once," Clara said slowly, "that women like me were born to be shadows, pretty, obedient, quiet. I think I spent half my life trying to prove her wrong, and the other half being afraid she was right." Elias touched her cheek. "You're not a shadow, you're the damn sun." Clara smiled. Not just at him, but through him, beyond him. "I think I finally believe that." The town had changed, too. Miss Hattie convinced the postmaster to fund a proper schoolhouse. Clara volunteered twice a week to teach reading to the ranch kids. She taught them letters and stories and how to recognize their own voices in the quiet. Elias returned to leatherwork in the evenings. His hands, once meant only for mending fences and holding reins, now crafted bridles and boots with the kind of care that only comes from someone who knows what it means to lose something, and to choose something better. They hosted supper on Sundays. Neighbors came from 5-10 miles out. Hank brought pie, Miss Hattie brought opinions. Children ran through the orchard, no one left hungry. The cabin, once too still, now echoed with laughter and warmth. And every morning Clara rose first. She lit the stove, fed the hens, tied her apron, and watched the sun touch the porch. She was never still for long, but she no longer moved to escape, she moved to build. One evening, as the sky turned copper and the air held that thick summer hum, Clara and Elias sat on the porch steps watching the horizon. He passed her a cup of cooled coffee. She took it with a smile. "You think folks like us ever really get to rest?" she asked. "Not sure we're made for it. But we're allowed to try, right?" He nodded. "We earned that much." They sat a while longer, legs brushing. Hope whinnied in the distance. The chickens rustled in their roost. A fox called once, far off, and was answered by silence. Then Clara spoke. "Back in Boston, when things were bad, I used to tell myself there had to be more than just surviving. More than just waiting for someone to decide I mattered." Elias turned to her. "And now I wake up every day and decide for myself, and that changes everything. Caloused, strong, real." "You built something here," he said. "Not just a home, not just a life, but a place where we both get to be whole." She rested her head on his shoulder. "We did it together, that's the difference." They watched the sun sink below the far hills, its final light catching the window panes, the grass tips, the edge of the roof. It had taken storms and fear and the weight of past lives to get here. But they had made it. Together. No longer alone. Just two people who had chosen each other day by day. And that, Clara thought as she breathed in the scent of warm earth and wood smoke, was the only kind of freedom worth chasing. She reached for his hand and held it firm. This time, she said, "I'm not leaving anything behind. I'm finally walking toward something."